They said no tank destroyer should ever move this fast. No tracked vehicle should glide across a battlefield like a sports car on an empty highway. But the first time American crews saw the M18 Hellcat roar across the proving grounds, its engine screaming, its tracks throwing dirt into the sky, its hull practically flying over the earth, they understood that this machine was not born from ordinary thinking. It was born from desperation, innovation, and the brutal reality of German armored dominance in the early years of World War II. The Hellcat did not look impressive. Its armor was barely enough to stop rifle fire. Its turret was open, exposing the crew to mortars, grenades, shrapnel, and the cold wind of any battlefield it crossed. But when its designers, engineers, and test crews watched it accelerate to more than 55 miles per hour, 90 kilometers per hour, they knew they had created something that broke all the rules. And in war, breaking the rules sometimes saves lives. Back in 1943, the U.S. Army faced a frightening truth. Their armored vehicles could not match German Tigers and Panthers head-on. American planners realized they could not simply replicate those steel monsters. The U.S. did not have the luxury of time or resources to design a tank with armor as thick or guns as large. Instead, they chose something radically different. Build a tank destroyer so fast, so agile, that it would never have to absorb a German shell. It would strike first. It would strike from the flank. It would strike from ambush. And then it would disappear before the enemy turret could even turn. That was the doctrine behind the Hellcat, hit and fade, a style of fighting completely alien to the German armored mindset. While German tanks were built like fortresses, the Hellcat was built like a predator. Everything unnecessary was stripped away. Thick armor, removed. Heavy turret armor, gone. Even the roof was left open. All of this served one purpose: speed. Speed not as a convenience, but as a weapon. Crews who first climbed inside an M18 were shocked. The interior was cramped and exposed, but when the engine roared to life, the vehicle trembled with energy like a wild animal waiting to sprint. Commanders quickly realized what they had been given: the fastest armored vehicle of the entire war, Allied or Axis. Nothing in the German arsenal could match it. Tigers crawled. Panthers sprinted only on paper. Even the nimble Panzer IV felt slow beside the Hellcat's furious acceleration. It wasn't just fast in a straight line. It cornered with startling smoothness. Drivers joked that the Hellcat didn't take turns, it slashed through them. On the battlefield, this meant everything. A Tiger needed time to pivot. A Panther struggled to adjust its hull to track a moving target. A Hellcat? It could reposition in seconds, sprint behind a ridge, shift to another firing position, and strike again from a different angle. German intelligence never anticipated such a machine. Their early reports dismissed American tank destroyers as lightly armored boxes with weak guns. But they had misread the entire philosophy. The M18 wasn't supposed to duel from the front. It wasn't supposed to trade shots. Its 76mm M1A2 gun wasn't the strongest cannon of the war. But on a chassis moving faster than any Panzer could react, that gun became a precision instrument in the right hands. And it was the hands, steady, trained, and fearless, that made the difference. By mid-1944, the Hellcat began arriving in Europe. Crews learned its strengths and, crucially, its limits. They learned never to expose it in open fields, never to attempt frontal engagements, never to allow the enemy a second shot. They also learned something intoxicating. The Hellcat gave them control over the battlefield. They could dictate when and where the fight happened. They could disengage at will, something German tankers found infuriating. In the chaos of the Bocage, where the slow and heavy German armor struggled to maneuver or retreat, the M18 danced through gaps and around hedgerows like a tiger unleashed. The open turret, at first hated, became a surprising advantage. It allowed 360-degree situational awareness. Gunners could track targets with their own eyes, not just through scopes.
Commanders felt the wind, the shifting light, the bass rumble of distant artillery, everything that helped them read the battlefield like a living map. Yes, it made them vulnerable, but it also made them deadlier. What they sacrificed in safety, they gained in perception. Then came the moment all Hellcat crews remember, their first true hunt. The first time they sprinted into position, cut engine noise, and waited. The first time a German tank appeared through the trees. The first time the gunner whispered, "I have him." The first time they struck like lightning, firing a single shot into a Panther's flank and then vanished before the German turret could even turn. This was not tank warfare as the world knew it. This was something else entirely. And it was only possible because of the one thing that defined the Hellcat above all else: speed. Speed that rewrote tactics, speed that warped expectations, speed that gave the crew hope even against tanks 3 times their size. No one described it better than a captured German officer who watched Hellcats tear through his armored company during a flank attack. The Hellcat does not behave as a tank does. It hunts like a pack of wolves. We never know where it will strike next. The Germans had built monsters. The Americans had built a predator. And the battlefield was about to learn which one survived longer.
The M18 Hellcat was fast. Everyone who saw it knew that instantly. But speed alone doesn't kill a tiger. Velocity doesn't penetrate armor. What made the Hellcat truly frightening to German tank crews wasn't how quickly it moved, but how precisely it struck. Its 76mm M1A2 gun wasn't the most powerful weapon on the battlefield, not even close. It couldn't reliably pierce the front glasses of a Panther. It couldn't crack a Tiger's frontal turret unless the shot hit a seam at exactly the right angle. On paper, the gun looked inadequate. But on the battlefield, in the hands of a trained American gunner, it became something entirely different. It became a scalpel, one delivered by a surgeon moving at 90 kilometers an hour. Gunners learned early that the Hellcat's power wasn't raw penetration, it was choice. The ability to choose where to shoot, when to shoot, and how to shoot. A Sherman crew might have been forced into head-on engagements, their only hope being rapid fire and luck. A Hellcat gunner operated with intention, not desperation. Every round mattered, every shot had a purpose. In training grounds across the American Midwest, gun crews drilled endlessly, estimating ranges by sight, calculating deflection, reading tank silhouettes in seconds. Many gunners learned to identify a Panther or Tiger not by its shape, but by the way sunlight glinted off a sloped turret roof or the way exhaust smoke curled above the engine deck. These details mattered because the Hellcat lived and died by precision. It only had one chance, one shot, one opening. In Europe, Hellcat crews quickly discovered the magic distances, the ranges at which their 76mm gun could turn German giants into metal carcasses, 500 to 800 meters, close enough to penetrate side armor, far enough to escape counterfire. But landing a side shot at that distance was not luck, it was art. And it was the gunner's art most of all. Inside that open turret, the gunner was the center of everything. He was often the calmest man in the crew, not because he lacked fear, but because fear made his hands steadier, his breath slower, his eyes sharper. He kept both eyes open, scanning for movement even while tracking a target through the scope. He learned to fire between breaths. He learned the rhythm of German turrets, the slow swing of a Panther, the heavier rotational growl of a Tiger. He listened to his commander's voice, short and urgent. Left 2, steady. Load HVAP. Targets, side armor. 700 meters. Fire. When the gunner squeezed the trigger, there was no hesitation. The recoil slammed the turret. The brass shell casing clattered to the turret floor. The loader was already pushing the next round into the breach. And the gunner leaned in again, eyes locked on the impact. The 76mm round didn't always kill instantly. Sometimes it punched a fist-sized hole into the engine compartment, sending smoke and flame pouring out as the German crew scrambled to escape.
Sometimes it pierced the turret ring, jamming the weapon permanently and turning the Panzer into a helpless steel bunker. Sometimes it hit the side plate just above the tracks, where the German designers had no room for thick armor, and the entire vehicle froze mid-turn, immobilized and doomed. But when the hit was perfect, when aim, timing, angle, and range aligned, the shot was devastating. The round punched clean through the thin rear armor of a Panther, tearing through fuel cells, ammunition racks, and men. Sometimes the turret blew off. Sometimes the tank simply died in silence, fire licking out of its vision ports. German crews began reporting these terrifying encounters. We were struck from angles that should not have been possible. The Americans fire as if they already know our weak points. Their small guns destroy our heavy tanks from the side as if from nowhere. They didn't understand what the Hellcat crews had mastered, the gunner's dream, the ideal shot created through speed, terrain, and discipline. To create that shot, the Hellcat needed the cooperation of the entire crew. The driver danced with the tank like it was alive, braking and accelerating to give the gunner the perfect moment. The commander scanned for enemy movement, anticipating the path of the German tank. The loader worked with machine-like rhythm, feeding shells as fast as the gunner could fire. They operated not as 5 men, but as one creature. Sight, speed, and steel working in a single heartbeat. One Hellcat veteran wrote, "We weren't a tank crew, we were a bow, and the gunner was the arrow." Terrain was the gunner's ally. The Hellcat loved ridgelines, hedgerow gaps, and slopes. A German tank exposed itself for only a second, but sometimes that second was enough. The Hellcat would crest a hill just long enough for the gunner to fire, then reverse so fast the German round slammed harmlessly into the dirt. German officers called this tactic the pop-up shot. American crews called it the dream shot, because they knew, in that single moment, the gunner held the life or death of giants in his hands. By 1944, German tankers learned a terrifying truth. The Hellcat didn't need brute force or thick armor. It didn't need to win every engagement. It needed only a single opportunity, one exposed flank, one careless turret swing, one moment where a Panther or Tiger forgot that the battlefield was never truly safe. The Hellcat gunner watched for that moment, waited for it, lived for it, and when it came, he never missed.
The first soldiers to truly understand the Mk2's power weren't those who faced the enemy, they were the ones who faced their own grenades. Training ranges across America, from Camp Roberts in California to Fort Benning in Georgia, became the proving grounds, not just for skill, but for fear. The Army had begun to realize that the Mk2 wasn't a simple tool, it was a pact with destruction. Every recruit who held one knew it. The line between mastery and tragedy was a heartbeat long. At Camp Hood in 1943, a training instructor named Sergeant Howard Leeds demonstrated the proper throwing technique to a group of wide-eyed recruits. He had done it 100 times before. Pull the pin, hold the spoon, count 1, 2, 3, and throw. The grenade arced cleanly into the pit, landing with a dull thud. The explosion sent a sharp crack across the field. And then, something unexpected. A fragment whistled past and struck a wooden post 90 yards behind them. The class fell silent. Leeds turned to his men and said quietly, "That's why you hug the dirt." Stories like that became lessons carved into the Army's collective muscle memory. Instructors began each live throw session with the same warning. When you throw, you drop, and you don't look up till you hear it die. Soldiers practiced that reflex until it was instinct, a choreography of survival. Throw, drop, count, breathe. But even perfect training couldn't prevent every tragedy. The Mk2 had no favorites. At Camp Bragg in 1944, a recruit in Company F panicked mid-throw. The pin came out, the grenade slipped from his hand, and it landed between him and the sergeant beside him. The drill sergeant didn't hesitate. He shoved the recruit into the trench and covered him with his own body as the grenade detonated.
The instructor survived, barely. The recruit didn't speak for 3 days. The base commander later wrote in his report, "The grenade behaved as designed. The human heart behaved better." Even in safe hands, danger found ways to linger. Fragments from training detonations sometimes flew past adjacent ranges, slicing through sandbags or tents. At Camp Robinson, a fragment from a live throw pit tore through a mess hall roof 80 yards away, embedding itself in a support beam. Nobody was injured, but that fragment, still hot, still humming, was mounted later in the officers' quarters with a brass plate beneath it. Respect distance. The Army took the message to heart. Training pits were redesigned. Observation towers were reinforced. Instructors began enforcing a new rule: no spectators within 150 yards during live throw sessions. Posters appeared on barrack walls. Fragments have no friends. But discipline alone wasn't enough. The grenade demanded respect born not from fear, but from familiarity. And that meant repetition. Thousands of men threw MK2s until the weight of its pineapple-shaped body felt like an extension of their palm, heavy, warm, alive. When they deployed overseas, that familiarity would save them, and sometimes still kill them. In combat, Normandy, 1944. The hedgerows were thick, the fields tight, and visibility short. Small squads advanced in silence, clearing one farmhouse at a time. For most soldiers, the grenade was a trusted opener, a way to clear rooms without walking into them. But on June 15th, Private Lester "Red" Harmon of the 2nd Infantry learned how quickly that trust could turn. Harmon threw a grenade through a window of a French barn occupied by German machine gunners. The blast cleared the room, but a fragment punched through the wooden wall and struck the platoon's medic 60 yards away. The medic survived, but Harmon never forgot. He wrote home later, "I threw it to save them, and it nearly killed my own." That contradiction, power and peril intertwined, hunted the front lines. The MK2 could devastate an enemy squad in an instant, but it required space, timing, and absolute awareness. American doctrine began to evolve on the ground. Soldiers learned to shout, "Frag out," before throwing, a warning born of instinct long before it became standard procedure. Units adopted the 5-second rule: throw, drop, and never rise before the echo fades. In the ruins of Aachen, a city turned to concrete dust. The grenade became a language of its own. Infantrymen tossed MK2s down stairwells, through shattered windows, into cellars filled with German defenders. The confined spaces turned each explosion into a thunderclap. Shards of concrete mixed with iron fragments. After clearing one building, a lieutenant wrote in his journal, "We learned to fear our own echoes. Every wall can throw back death." The war's harshest lesson came during the Battle of the Bulge, when the snow turned every grenade's shockwave into a ricochet. Frozen ground reflected the blast outward, sending fragments skipping across the ice. A patrol from the 99th Division lost 2 men that winter, not to the enemy, but to their own grenades exploding too close on frozen soil. Survivors later remembered the sight, a field glittering with tiny shards of steel under the moonlight, like the stars had fallen to earth. In the Pacific, the lessons were even bloodier. Jungle fighting blurred distance and direction. In the tangle of vines and trees, every throw risked hitting a branch and detonating too early. On Guadalcanal, Marines learned to throw low, bouncing grenades into enemy foxholes instead of lobbing them. At Tarawa, one squad of the 2nd Marine Division lost 3 men when a grenade exploded in a palm thicket, fragments slicing back through their own line. After that, veterans passed down a simple rule: if you can't see the ground it's going to hit, don't throw. But even amid that chaos, the MK2 proved indispensable. Its compact power broke defenses that rifles couldn't touch. In a tunnel complex on Luzon, a bazooka team, trapped by Japanese troops, used grenades to seal off tunnels one by one. The explosions were deafening, echoing through the rock until the men could feel the shockwaves in their teeth. "It was like shaking hands with lightning," one of them said afterward. "You knew it could turn on you, but you shook anyway." Every grenade thrown was a tiny act of faith. Soldiers trusted the 4-second fuse, the cast iron casing, the choreography of motion. But even with all their training, accidents shadowed them. A pin pulled too early, a fuse that burned too fast, a fragment that found the wrong target. The Army kept meticulous records, but behind each statistic was a name, a friend, a body carried to the aid station. By 1945, the Mk2 had earned its reputation as both savior and executioner. Soldiers still loved it, for its simplicity, for its certainty, but they never forgot what it demanded in return. It wasn't a weapon to be thrown casually. It was a weapon to be survived. In after-action reports, officers began writing phrases that would become doctrine for generations to come. Throw from cover whenever possible. Lie flat immediately after release. No man stands after he throws. The Mk2 had taught its users not just how to kill, but how to endure, how to live within inches of death and still fight on. It had turned battlefields into classrooms, each explosion a lesson in humility. And as the war entered its final phase, from the jungles of the Pacific to the ruins of Germany, those lessons would follow every soldier who carried the pineapple-shaped grenade on his belt. Because by then, they all knew, when you pulled that pin, you weren't just throwing a weapon. You were gambling with the invisible mathematics of fate and hoping that for just one more day, physics and fortune would be on your side.
Winter was supposed to belong to the German tanks. In the cold, in the forests, in the blizzards that swallowed entire valleys, the heavy armor of the Reich, Tigers, Panthers, even aging Panzer IVs, was meant to dominate. Their thick steel hulls were built for endurance. Their long guns cut through fog like spears. Their engines, though temperamental, gave them raw strength in terrain where lighter Allied vehicles often struggled. But when the first snow of the Ardennes fell in December 1944 and the German winter offensive began, the battlefield revealed a truth that few expected. Winter did not belong to the biggest tank. It belonged to the fastest one. And nothing was faster in the European theater than the Hellcat. The Battle of the Bulge was chaos, white, frozen chaos. Snow piled on the Hellcat's open turret until the loader had to scoop it out with his helmet. Ice formed on the gun shield. Mud froze solid. Engines groaned in the cold. But despite the conditions, the Hellcat adapted. It did more than adapt. It thrived in ways German crews could not understand. While Panthers and Tigers lumbered through deep snow, sinking into soft ground, grinding their gears against steep forest roads, the Hellcat did what it always did. It moved like a shadow. It leapt from firing position to firing position. It used its light weight not as a weakness, but as a winter advantage. German tankers who expected to face Shermans were stunned to find themselves ambushed by vehicles that they could not catch, could not track, and often could not even see. In the fog-covered Ardennes, sound became more important than sight. Panther crews listened for the roar of an approaching engine, but the Hellcat didn't roar. It cut through the cold like a whisper. Its engines hummed, its tracks bit into snow with a quick staccato rhythm, and then, just as a Panther commander swung his binoculars to a clearing, the Hellcat fired. A 76mm shell cracked through the winter air and punched straight through the Panther's side armor. Smoke curled upward. Snow melted into steam around the glowing entry wound. Inside the German tank, men scrambled to escape as the engine compartment ignited. But by the time they climbed out, searching desperately for the attacker, the Hellcat was gone. Already halfway down a forest road, already repositioning, already preparing its next shot. The winter duels became a cruel lesson for the Germans. Their heavy tanks were no match for something they couldn't catch. A Tiger could tear a Sherman apart at a kilometer, but it couldn't pivot fast enough to respond to a Hellcat firing from its flank. A Panther had thick frontal armor, But in the twisting forests of Belgium, its sides and rear, the very places the Hellcat aimed for, were exposed again and again. One German officer wrote bitterly after the battle near Noville, "It is not a tank, it is a winter wolf. It comes and goes as it pleases." The Hellcat's open turret, a nightmare in warm weather where artillery threatened from overhead, became an unexpected strength in winter. The gunner could see through the fog better than a crew sealed inside a Panther. He could hear engines idling behind trees, track footsteps in the snow, and sense danger in the cold silence. Many Hellcat commanders claimed the cold sharpened their instincts, turning them into hunters in a white wilderness. But the winter duels weren't just about ambushes. They were about endurance. Panthers struggled to start in freezing temperatures. Their engines choked, fuel thickened, lubricants solidified. Tigers needed crews to light fires under their transmissions just to warm them enough to move. The Hellcat? Its radial aircraft engine hated the cold too, but it started quicker, warmed faster, and kept running with less maintenance. Crews joked that the Hellcat was like a dog that wanted to run in the snow. During one engagement south of Bastogne, a Hellcat platoon from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion encountered a pair of Tigers advancing slowly down a forest road. The American commander didn't hesitate. He split his platoon into two teams. One drew the Tigers' attention, firing a single shot before disappearing behind a frozen ridge. The Germans, thinking they had forced a retreat, pressed forward, straight into the flank of the second team lying in wait. The Hellcats fired almost simultaneously. 2 shots, 2 impacts. One Tiger immobilized. The other, attempting to swing its turret, was hit again. Fire burst from its exhaust ports. Snow blackened as the flame grew. It was a perfect demonstration of what winter combat meant for the M18. Speed beat armor, sight beat steel, coordination beat brute force. German tankers became increasingly frustrated. Their thick armor gave them no comfort against an enemy they rarely saw. Their heavy guns were useless when they couldn't bring them to bear. Their tactics, built around frontal superiority, meant nothing in forests where lines of sight were short and Hellcats roamed like wolves. In the fog of the Ardennes, in the narrow mountain passes of Vosges, and in the frozen ridges of Alsace, the M18 Hellcat proved something the Germans had never fully understood. A tank's greatest enemy is not always a bigger gun or thicker armor. Sometimes its greatest enemy is speed, paired with a gunner who knows exactly where to aim. Winter punished the slow. Winter punished the proud. Winter punished the heavy. But the Hellcat? Winter turned it into a predator.
The M18 Hellcat was fast, agile, and clever, but none of those qualities meant anything without the man behind the gun. The turret could spin, the engine could roar, and the hull could leap across a field at impossible speed, but it was the gunner who decided whether the Hellcat lived or died. Every round that left the 76mm barrel carried not just steel and explosive force, it carried the heartbeat, instincts, and discipline of the man who fired it. And for many crews, the gunner was not merely a crew member. He was the soul of the machine. In the cramped open turret of a Hellcat, the gunner sat slightly forward and left of center, the breech of the 76mm gun beside him like a slumbering beast. He kept one hand on the elevation wheel, the other near the trigger, his cheek pressed against the metal frame of the sighting scope. His world narrowed into a tunnel of focus, fine lines etched into glass, shadows moving across distant tree lines, the faint shimmer of a tank's silhouette half hidden behind a ridge. While the rest of the crew heard only the roar of engines and the chaos of battle, the gunner saw the truth, the precise angle of a Panther's turret, the weak spot where a Tiger's armor dipped near the engine plate, the moment when a Panzer IV turned just enough to expose a perfect target. This level of focus wasn't born from training alone. It was born from fear, the constant pounding fear of knowing that if he missed his first shot, he might never get a second. Hellcats were not Shermans. They were not built to take hits. A single German round could tear the turret open like a tin can. The gunner's accuracy wasn't just a matter of pride, it was survival. Crews often said the gunner aged years in a single campaign. He went to sleep seeing angles. He woke up replaying shots.
He lived with the weight of every kill and every miss. But when a gunner was good, when he mastered the art of reading distance, adjusting for slope, interpreting wind, and anticipating German behavior, the Hellcat transformed. It became something lethal, something uncanny, something German tankers whispered about with unease. One German captain wrote after facing Hellcats near a Rackard, "These Americans fire as if they see the shot before it happens." That was exactly what the best Hellcat gunners did. They saw the shot before the trigger was pulled. They learned to read German tankers' habits. Tigers always turn their turret right first. Panthers expose their left side more when reversing. Panzer IV commanders like to poke their cupolas out just long enough for a skilled gunner to take the kill shot. The Hellcat gunner knew all of these patterns as intimately as a hunter knows the gait of prey. And the 76mm gun, far from being weak, was perfectly suited to a marksman. Its flatter trajectory, rapid reload speed, and compatibility with HVAP rounds made it deadly in the hands of someone who could exploit its strengths. At 500 to 800 meters, the gunner could strike with surgical precision. At 300 meters, he could place a shot exactly where he wanted. Turret ring, transmission block, lower side plate. At 1,000 meters, he could still threaten the Panther if the angle was right. During the Battle of St. Vith, a Hellcat gunner named Daniel "Red" Lawson reportedly placed 3 shots into the same Panther in under 15 seconds. One to immobilize it, one to cripple the turret, and a final one through the rear deck. When asked how he did it, he simply said, "I knew where I needed the rounds to go, and I put them there." He didn't boast, he didn't grin, he didn't celebrate. Because he knew if he had missed the first shot, his crew might have been dead. The weight of responsibility turned Hellcat gunners into something rare. Warriors who blended instinct with calculation, nerves with discipline. They were artists painting with fire, carving loopholes into giants. And when everything aligned, the driver held steady, the commander called out the angle, the loader slammed around into the breach, and the target presented itself, the gunner achieved something close to perfection. Veterans called this moment the gunner's dream. Not because it was easy, but because it was the moment every gunner lived for. A single, flawless shot. The perfect angle, the perfect distance, the perfect kill. A moment when time slowed and the battlefield shrunk into a single point of focus. A faint silhouette in the fog, the outline of a Panther's turret, the faint glow of an engine deck. The gunner's heartbeat matched the rhythm of the turret. His breath steadied, his finger tightened, and the world erupted. German commanders who survived these duels spoke with a mixture of frustration and respect. The Hellcat gunner is the deadliest part of the machine. They were right. Speed gave the Hellcat options. Mobility gave it opportunity. But skill, pure human skill, gave it victory. By the end of the war, the M18 Hellcat held one of the highest kill-to-loss ratios of any American armored vehicle. Not because it was the strongest, not because it was the safest, but because the men who fired its gun made every shot count. And long after the engines cooled and the turrets fell silent, one truth remained. A tank destroyer is only as deadly as the man who pulls the trigger. And the Hellcat's gunners were the deadliest hunters the war ever saw.